Hey, it's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I am a comic creator, comic artist, comics writer, self publisher, and I share my creative process here with you live online. If you'd like to contribute to this YouTube channel to get bonus videos, bonus blog posts, behind the scenes process for as little as $2 a month, you can support this channel and subscribe for bonus content at patreon.com/GERIMI. That's my name, weird spelling. If you'd like to see some of my comic books, read them, get a look at the work that I'm creating, what the finished product looks like, I have a bunch of free PDFs posted online that you can download at comics.jeremy.net. And if you would like to buy some of my books, my first self-contained graphic novel, Eye of the Gods, the first volume of my current series, Morning Star, which is Lucifer's Fall from Heaven told as a Western, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. That will redirect you to my Amazon author page. So, I see we've already got some folks in the chat. Let's see. I see Amaris is here. Hey, thanks for joining us. Glad you're able to make it. Ian Rocks is in the chat as always. Good to see you, man. Thanks for showing up. So, all right, diving in here. I had been doing, before I was doing figure drawing last week, I can't remember if it was the week before, but I was doing color thumbnails for a piece that I had an idea for. I see Sierra Studios is in the chat. Thanks, Sierra. Thanks for showing up. So, I should probably bring the camera a little bit closer so that we can get nice and cozy here and you guys get a better look at what I've got going on this week. Basically, the piece that I've been doing thumbnails for, I see Lego Studios in the chat. Hey, thanks for showing up. Nice to have you here. So the piece that I am working on, I believe I had shown you my thumbnail process where I was doing color thumbnails for this piece, and it is a Reaper tucking a young girl into bed. And I'm tentatively calling this piece Goodnight. And as I mentioned in previous live streams, this isn't meant to be an upsetting or disturbing piece. I mean, it's meant to create a sense of conflict. And I've described, I believe I've explained before, my idea is that we fight against so many things in life and we struggle. And a lot of that comes from the anxiety about our mortality. And the idea of this piece was death coming to tuck you in, not as a monster to be feared, but it's putting us to our final sleep. That this shouldn't be a frightening thing, but that it's a peaceful thing. It's a nurturing thing. It's putting us to sleep. It's our final good night. So that's this piece. I've got a couple of thumbnails that I've done of it. I see Travis Fredericks in the chat. Hey, Travis, thanks for stopping by and joining us. So, hang on, I have to pull my chair over. Let's see, Art with Osir B said, hey, Jeremy, I just finished a live stream as well. Well, you know what? Thanks for popping in here. I will have to, when I'm done, I'll go check out your stream. He asked how my Sunday is before the holiday. It's good. I spent a lot of yesterday really trying to recover from several weeks of just overexhaustion, not getting enough exercise, illness, and yesterday was kind of a rest day, and now today is going to be sort of an art day, and hopefully I will be able to carry that over and be productive tomorrow. But as for this, so I moved from doing a bunch of color thumbnails to doing 2 different illustrations. Well, these are what I basically call my my layout drawings. I see Lego Studios in the chat. He said, I'm going to buy Morningstar. Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. I'd love to hear what you think. Feel free to drop me a line in the comments, or or you can always hit me up through my website or email. Let me know what you think. But I really appreciate the support. I hope you enjoy the book. So I did 2 different layout drawings. And I do my layout drawings on vellum so that I can flip them and make corrections on the other side. And normally, this other side ends up being all in just normal, regular graphite pencil, and that way I can see the difference between the red lines of the original and the graphite lines of the correction. The reason why I didn't go in here and make details, instead I just flipped back and forth like one does when they're flipping your drawings and made the corrections. The reason for that is because I'm gonna reuse these layout drawings because I'm eventually going to do a color piece. What I'm gonna work on today is just a black and white ink illustration. I'm gonna do these to sell at conventions, and if that goes well, then I'll move on to doing a color piece. And if that sells, then I'll move on to doing a larger color piece and making prints and so on and so forth. So I'm kind of using these original drawings as a test case to see if people like the concept enough for me to go on to mass producing them. That said, I'm going to reuse these drawings when I do the color piece. And if I go in and I make all of the dark line drawings on there, it's going to make it really hard for me to be able to see the line work. Not so much with this one, but I did a second drawing where I traced the exact same figures, but much like my thumbnails, I did one version where the lighting is coming from where the viewer is, well, a little bit off to the side, as if there's a side table that's lighting the figure this way. I did one version that's like this, and then I did one version where the figure and the girl is backlit. Now, all of this area here that I left open, I didn't put the X's in there that you usually use when doing comic work, but this is all going to be basically silhouette, solid black. So the figure's going to be highly backlit. I see some more folks in the chat. Lego Studios says, do you write scripts for your comics? Yes, I do. I have a whole video. If you go into the search bar of my channel and search for writing, one of the top 2 videos that should show up is one where I basically run through my writing process. And what I do is much like I do very detailed thumbnails. As I showed you, I've got a couple of different thumbnails. Like when I mentioned this piece right here, the one that's backlit, I did a couple of different versions of color pieces, but this is basically what I'm going for. So it's mostly in silhouette. So the lighting scheme was different enough that I wanted to have 2 separate layout drawings because it was really going to change where I put the shadows in. And they're different enough in my mind that it's worth doing 2 separate illustrations. But much like I do several different thumbnails before I move on to making a finished piece, when I write, I do a lot of different versions of the outline, move pieces around. The outline to me is like thumbnailing in words. Once I get my outline done, then I usually will write dialogue as I go, but I'm not precious about it. I'll toss a line in there. Sometimes I'll do dialogue that's on the nose. Sometimes I can't even think of the right words, but I'll write down the idea that I want the character to express. So it's more like note-taking. Then when I go in and I flesh it out a little bit more, I'll add a little bit more dialogue. But I go from my outline to my thumbnailing, and then, in terms of my writing process. And then as I thumbnail, I usually will come up with better lines of dialogue as I'm looking at the picture. Almost kind of like in the Marvel style, where a writer will write a plot summary, give that to the artist, and then when they get the pages back, they'll script them. I kind of do that process myself, where where as I do my thumbnails, I'll add dialogue. Then I go in and I actually will letter the pages before I draw them, so I can print out boards with the place left for me to do my actual layouts, the stuff that where I flip drawings and detail the composition. So I go in and I refine the dialogue in that pass. So it's very much more of an organic back and forth. I don't write all of the dialogue at once, and I will change panels around as I letter and as I thumbnail. So because I'm doing all of the work, it's a lot more organic and free-flowing, as opposed to I write my dialogue, I write my script, I write my dialogue, then I draw the artwork. There's very much more of a back and forth. I see Art of Reed in the chat. He said, hey, brother, hope all is well. All is excellent. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling healthier than I have in the past couple of weeks. I'm sorry that I've had a nasty cough the past few weeks in the live stream, and you guys have had to put up with hearing me making hacking gross sounds in the background. Lego Studios also asks, is there going to be a volume 2 of Morningstar? Most definitely. Volume 1 ends on a bit of a cliffhanger, so I think people would be very pissed if there wasn't a volume 2. Volume 2 is going to be the final volume. I always planned for the series to be an 8-issue series. So Volume 1 has issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 has issues 5 through 8. So, although the final issue is actually going to be oversized. And a big part of that is that there was too much that I wanted to fit into this final chapter of the story. And I didn't want, there were certain details I really didn't want to cut. And I thought, if I'm publishing this, if I'm the one who decides what it is or isn't going to be, then yeah, I can decide that I want to do a bunch of extra work to make it end the way I want it to end. So, and I would have considered breaking it into a second issue and having it be issues 8 and 9 to wrap up the story, because the final issue, at the way I have it broken out now, is going to be 40 pages, and normally my issues are 24. But 40 pages told everything that I wanted to say perfectly. I didn't want to cut anything out. But if I go and have to now add an extra 8 pages of story in order to break it into two, 24-page issues, then I would be kind of vamping a little bit and putting in stuff that didn't need to be there. And I kind of thought 40 pages is just right. I don't want to add stuff that doesn't need to be there. I don't want to add fat, to the story. I don't want to, be vamping, but I also don't want to cut critical things. And so I just said, yeah, it would make my life, it would be financially better for me if I could break it into 2 issues and I'd have more work to sell. But I didn't want to, bloat the story. It tells everything and ends on the note that I want it to end on. So yes, there will be a volume 2. When I finish these couple of issues, I will be getting back to work on thumbnails for that. Amara said my cavity filling came out, so I can't speak. Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. I hope that you'll be able to get to the dentist sometime soon next week and get that taken care of. And I hope you're not in too much discomfort. So be careful, stay away from hard foods and hot and cold fluids. I'm sorry, that's the sound of me slurping on a... Believe it or not, I drink my coffee through a straw. It is a metal straw, and the reason why I drink through a metal straw is because I don't want my teeth to be coffee stained or tea stained, and the metal straw just allows me to keep it from getting on my teeth. So let me respond to a couple of more questions on the chat, and then I'm actually going to get started with drawing, because I've been sitting here just jawing all this time, and I'm not making anything. Lego Studios says, I'm creating my own weekly series called Zombie Comics Weekly. Well, you know what? When you get it done, feel free to, send me a link. I'll share it in the comments or share it on my on the community page for my channel. Mara says she's getting her tooth fixed Tuesday. Well, good. I hope that it goes well. So here we go. On to the inking. So I'm just basically using the same process I use when I ink my my comics. I realize I've got a pretty good workflow with comics, and I should start using that, just duplicating that same process when I do my my standalone illustrations. Let me get a few things off of the board so I can have a little bit more space to work. So I'm going to take the backlit version. I'm going to put that aside. I probably will not get to that today because, hell, I don't even know if I'm going to get a chance to... I don't know how far I'm going to get through with this one. But I also, the reason why I've got this up, my sketchbook up here, is not just to look at my color thumbnail. I've got, you're not going to be able to see it because it's going to be up. Well, actually, you know what? It looks weird because it's got all the images behind there. You're not really going to be able to see it. I'll put this above here. So I have my my layout drawing to reference, because this layout drawing, I scanned it in, then scaled it down to print on Bristol board, and it is very, very faint. There's details on here that I am not even going to be able to see, and I drew this, so that's why I want to have my layout drawing above. But these smaller thumbnails that I drew, the purpose of them is specifically for the window. There's a window behind the figure, even though the light source is in front of the figure. And when in color, it's real easy. The background is black. The sky is very, very dark blue. So you can see with color, there's doing the contrast. In the black and white, I have to decide, do I want this to be black or slightly lighter? And slightly lighter is the way that it is in the image. So the question is, how do I want to do that with inks? And I tried one version where I had the background completely black and then just had some light hatching, so it was mostly dark with stars on top of it. Then I did another version where I did the reverse, where the window is completely black and the room is a little bit lighter. I prefer this version first. And then these last couple of images were me just saying, well, what happens if I paint the entire thing black and then paint just a very faint white on top of that to just lighten the window? And I think that that's probably the direction I'm going to go. But I am very obsessive when it comes to thumbnails. I will try to work out all of the different, I try to see all of the things that can go wrong or all of the problems that I'm going to have to solve in the ink drawing. And as opposed to trying to save a drawing, I will, for the most part, try to fix these things and figure them out here, and maybe even do a small test drawing. This bottom one is me doing the exact same thing, but then adding a little bit of ink wash to see how the values would look with this thing being completely black and then fading into the figure. But I try to figure out all of these things before I get to the finished illustration. Because a lot of times people are under the illusion that, oh, well, you're an experienced illustrator, you know what you're doing. You just go in and you draw. And I'm like, no, I will make mistakes and I will screw up this piece if I don't do these little details here. There are some artists that do have the entire thing pictured in their head and visualized and have it all worked out. And I admire those artists. I don't have that skill. I have to figure out things in tiny little sketches and in bits and pieces before I draw. And sometimes I get halfway through a piece and I realize that there's mistakes or problems visually. Maybe they're lighting mistakes or anatomy mistakes that I thought I had covered all the angles. I thought I had worked out all the problems. And sometimes I have to stop in the middle of a piece and just go and rework it and try to figure out what I did wrong. Excuse me. So, now that I'm actually getting into starting working on this piece, I may occasionally zone out a little bit. So if I don't respond to anything in the chat, I'll try to remember to look up every few minutes and come back and comment and respond to you guys. But I'm sort of mentally going into the zone here. This process where I'm sort of commenting while I'm drawing. See, that's the thing. I can talk and draw at the same time. I'm much better at listening and drawing at the same time. If someone else is doing the talking and I'm drawing, sometimes they can't even tell like the difference. They're like, how can you pay such attention? I'm like, well, it's much easier for me to listen and respond than it is for me to actually talk. But I seem to have gotten decent at talking and drawing at the same time. But talking, drawing, and responding to the chat all at once gets becomes difficult to juggle mentally. But I see another comment here before I start inking. Art with Osier says, your process seems similar to the way a friend of mine. It is traditional and very methodical. It seems only people from graphic design, multimedia, and film who do thumbnails. You know, it's funny that you mentioned that because my day job, I'm a product designer for a toy company, and I've worked for most of my life either doing graphic design, packaging design, or product design. So yes, a lot of that, the iteration process comes out of that work habit. I would definitely say that graphic design has greatly influenced my creative process. And I would say that the nature of doing thumbnails and doing various iterations and multiple versions of a piece until I find the right one, that comes from working for companies where you'll do a version and you may think the very first version you did, you're like, wow, I nailed it. This piece is great. And then you'll show it to your boss, and your boss will have comments and say, well, you know, we like it, but I really kind of saw it more like this. I saw it in this color instead of that color. Can we make the background lighter? Can we make it darker? Can we change the scale of these elements? And you change those things and you bring it back and you go back and forth 2 or 3 times. Then you're like, all right, I guess we got it. I got his input, it's great. Then your boss has to show it to his boss, and his boss has feedback and input. And you can see where this is going. By the time something is completed and done and reaches market, it has gone through many, many iterations and many comments and many changes. And it used to be early on that I think most designers start out getting irritated by all of the changes that they have to make. But the thing that I have found over almost 2 decades of illustration and design, and well, really the design work, is that a lot of times the comments that I may chafe the changes I might have chafed at making originally, a lot of times they really do make the product better. And I might not have seen it, and they're not changes that I would have made on my own. But a lot of times that feedback, I can look at it later on and say, you know what? These other people that had feedback, they were right to ask me to make these changes. And sometimes, even if they asked me to make a change that might not have been that smart of a change, the act of revisiting a concept and saying, well, how can I make this better? Or even somebody giving me art direction that I actively disagree with, but then I have to say, all right, well, how can I make this thing that I do not like and don't agree with, how can I turn this into something that I can be proud of, something I would want in my portfolio, something that I do think is a good piece of work. And that challenge makes you better. In fact, I often look at it like the reason why people have artists and designers, why they hire artists and designers, is because they don't have that skill, but they have an idea. They just don't really have the ability to create that vision, to bring that vision into reality. So it's almost like I'm renting out my imagination to them, my ability to create, to conceive, to make ideas, to formulate. And in that process, I mean, I've learned that reworking things, it's nice to be able to nail something on the first pass. But more often than not, every time I've had to revisit something, it has been for the better. All right, I will look up at the chat in a second just to see if there's something on there. I just want to, that's the other thing is while doing this, I kind of want to, it is challenging focusing on making these long, smooth brush strokes. It's a little shakier than I'm used to. I think that's just from the fact that I've mostly been inking thumbnails, which are much rougher and looser. And I think it takes me a little while to really get into that level of control that I have, where I just ink and I don't have to think at all. Right now, I very much, as I'm warming up, I'm very conscious of each line, and I'm conscious of places where the lines are not as smooth as I'd like. They're too thick. There's places where I will put in a line and I'll be like, oh wait, I need to come back and thin that out. Like right here, I'm trying to make sure, overall, the first thing I'm trying to do is kind of create a silhouette of all of the figures. Well, there's just 2 figures in this piece. But the other thing is I'm trying to be very careful to make the light on the underside lighter, the lines lighter on the underside, since that's where the light source is going to be coming from. Okay, let me go back up here to the chat. Definitely see some folks here. I'm glad you guys are so active. It makes me, the art board can be a lonely place. I'm sure you guys feel that. I'm sure Osir, I'm going to go back and check out your live stream later. I'm sure that there's times when you're out there and you're just working and you're just like, yeah, I'm just chugging away here, making stuff, throwing it out into the universe, into the empty echo of the void. So it is really nice having you guys here interacting and talking. So Art with Osir says, I don't mind doing thumbnails, roughs, and final pencils because that is my background as well. And that is why I say that. Unfortunately, I moved on to web development, but at heart, I'm still an artist at heart. It's funny. The way that I got into graphic design was that I studied drawing and painting in college, in my undergraduate program. And it was sort of towards the end of college when I started realizing, oh wait, I'm gonna have to get a job once I leave this school. That I started studying animation because that was the only thing that really fit what I was interested in doing. And animators actually need to know how to draw things from different angles. They were much more interested in illustration than, say, the fine art program, which was much more conceptually oriented. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just wasn't in line with what my actual personal goals were. That said, I couldn't find any work in animation full time. However, I was in college in the 90s, and it was right when the internet boom, the very first .com boom happened. So when I got out of school, I knew how to use computers. I knew how to use Photoshop, Illustrator fairly well, and I had gotten to learn how to use Flash a little bit from a job that I'd had first as an intern and then basically my first job out of college. And in learning how to use Flash, I found that while I couldn't find jobs doing animation for film or TV, people would hire anybody who knew how to click a mouse if they knew Flash. So went into graphic design as a web animator. And I found it's interesting that you said that you went into web development, because I got into graphic design by doing web design, and I was really not a web designer. I was more like a web animator. But the more I worked, the more graphic web design work I did, and I got to the point when I had to start like reading books on JavaScript and learning more and more programming. Like I still to this day haven't learned CSS, but I got to the point where I was learning to hand code HTML, and at a certain point I had to ask myself, do I want to be a programmer or do I want to be an artist? Because I was spending all of my time really delving into having to spend a lot of my spare time instead of working on becoming a better artist, spending more time learning more about programming. And I made a conscious choice to move away from web work, and that's how I ended up in packaging design. And there's times when I look back and I think, I see a lot. The internet continues to evolve, and much like you said, you went into web development. I would say that as a career path, that's much more secure, because the internet continues to evolve, and people are always going to need someone who knows how to code. And if you can combine coding with a good design sense and a good design ethic, I think you'll probably always be able to find work somewhere. That is not true for illustration. It's not true for animation. But your comment that that you're an artist at heart, but you went on to web development, kind of reminded me of those good old days. So back up to the chat. I know there's a lot of people going in there. In fact, let me start drawing for a sec so I can respond to everybody. So let's see. So Aaron's in the chat and says, do it the Fountainhead way. Hire me under one condition. My work will not be changed and everything is final. Well, it's easy to say that. Sometimes it is difficult to dictate the... Okay, well, let's put it this way. You don't always have that option to dictate the terms you're going to work under. I'd say if you're somebody who, I don't know, if you're like James Gurney or you're Gerald Brom, you're an experienced illustrator or an artist, you can say, I'm going to do the work that I'm going to make, and you can either publish it or not publish it. You can either do this or not. In toy design, if you're not willing to do the work the way that a company wants you to work, they are more than happy to just move on to the next person and hire someone else who will. The thing that you need to remember is that people with purse strings and money, there are some people who are on an executive level and do have a sense of graphic taste and refinement and design. But for the most part, generally speaking, the reason why a lot of these people are hiring artists is because for them, they may not necessarily be able to tell between a good design or a bad design. They may look at one product or one design that has an overall red color scheme and not be able to tell that one version is red and it's got a lot of complementary colors and it's very aesthetically pleasing, and one that has reds but they're not, it'll have other color contrasts that are clashing, or it'll be all too bland and just feels monochromatic and flat. And they may not necessarily have the aesthetic taste to distinguish between the two. What that means is when it comes to hiring people, if they see one artist's portfolio and another artist's portfolio, unless they have a design director and art director who will tell them, you should pick this one over that one for these reasons, they may just look at it and be like, they both look the same to me. This person's going to do what I want. This other person's a pain in the ass. I'm going to go with the person who's going to do what I want. So it is nice to say that Fountainhead method or that Fountainhead approach of this is my work, accept it as is, or leave it unchanged. In doing artwork for any type of corporation or organization, even if you're being hired by another creative, if you're an artist being hired by a writer to draw their book or a small indie publisher, a lot of times they may want to have a very strong editorial hand on the number of panels per page, the color scheme if you're doing the coloring, or even if you're not doing the coloring, they may have, they may hire colorists who may not color your work the way you want it colored, but that's their guy and he makes their books look the way they want. So there's a lot of things in it that, unless you are self-publishing, which is the reason why I self-publish, you may not always have those options. And I'd be curious to hear, Aaron, your thoughts on that, in the sense of, like, have you worked for clients? How have you dealt with clients that have wanted to have, let's say, a heavy hand on the creative process in terms of art directing the artist? Art with Osir says, it was more fun to me back in the 90s. Crowdsourcing has killed the quality and uniqueness of it. Yeah, that's true. Everything now, everybody wants stuff like McDonald's. They want to just be able to order it, get it good and get it cheap at a standard quality, and have things kind of like plug and play. And the process of individually customizing and making something unique is it's challenging in this contemporary world. I mean, I know for me, the idea of building a site from scratch and making exactly what I want versus being able to just get a Squarespace site and put it up and just, it's simple. There's a couple of different templates and I can customize those. That convenience, I can see it from both sides. That convenience, it gives a lot more people access to something that they didn't have, but it also makes the world feel a little bit more generic. It's not something that has the answer is this or the answer is that. We live in a complex world and we have to make sacrifices here and there. Customization and uniqueness versus ease of use. It's a constant battle that I think artists, corporations, and individual consumers, people that consume art, media, culture, all have to face and deal with in their own personal tastes and budgets. Amara says, I'm working in my concept art portfolio. I always love refining the portfolio. I feel like part of the reason for me doing individual illustrations is to update my work. Sierra Studios says, I started in graphic design as well, and yes, I do thumbnails for everything. Art with Osir says, I did the same, but I had a bad instructor who said no money was in animation. When I was in college, I was doing keyline paste up, and computers was a thing at the end of my college. Yeah, it's funny. I learned Photoshop basically working at my school newspaper, and I was an illustrator. I would come in the morning for the school newspaper, because our school newspaper actually published daily, and it actually was paying work. So I was very lucky that was kind of my job in college. But I would come in the morning, pick up my my assignments, and I would usually do them during my lunch and then drop them off before having to go to track practice in the afternoon. And then they would run the next day or the day after. But I would see all of the design majors a lot of them were working at the school newspaper, and I could see them. I mean, they were using mostly Quark, and that's what they were doing for a lot of their work, but they all knew Photoshop and Illustrator and had to manipulate work, create infographics, and I could see that they were doing work that their goal was to get hired by the LA Times or the LA Weekly, or get hired by a newspaper somewhere after they finish. And I could see that they were doing an active skill set that people would pay money for them to do. And they would just show me, well, it started with just, here's how to scan in your work. Then it was, here's how to adjust the colors on your work. Learning how to draw with a mouse, which I still, I think that might be the first place that I saw someone using a Cintiq or a Wacom tablet. They certainly didn't have Cintiqs back when I was in college. But first time I saw somebody using a Wacom tablet, and I was like, oh, wow, there's a way to draw on the computer. And, they would slowly teach me. I learned a lot more about digital illustration and making artwork on the computer from the design students than I did from people that were art majors. So, all right, let me see some more comments in the chat. I see everyone is super active. This is actually really, really cool. I wish that there was a way that I could keep reading the chat while drawing at the exact same time. That way I could stay on top of everybody. I have to usually stop for a second, read through. But I guess Sierra Studios checked out Art with Osir's page because he said cool art, or he said cool art with Osir. Lego Studios asks, what series are you going to write and draw after Morningstar? Well, I have two projects planned. One project is a sequel to my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. Eye of the Gods was a psychological thriller. It is a psychological thriller. It's when a man is cursed with visions he can't control. He can look through other people's eyes and he can see what they see. The way that book ends, the character's life is really turned upside down. In the first book, he witnesses a murder, only to find out it's being reported in the news as a death by natural causes. So there's a conspiracy and a cover-up going on. He gets kind of wrapped up in getting to the bottom of it. Getting to the bottom of it changes his life forever, radically. And the second book is going to be about addressing what his new life is like. And what my plan is to do first a one-shot, basically a single comic book issue that is just a short story about his new normal. And then I have a longer story that I was planning. And that book actually ties in, believe it or not, it ties in with Morningstar. Even though Morningstar is a Western fantasy, I have a way that I think is interesting that will connect some of the characters from Morningstar in this character's world. Now I have another, well, beyond that, I have another comic book that it's too soon for me to really talk about, but I will be, eventually, you guys will see it here first. But one of the things that I'm actually going to do, probably before I even do the sequel to Eye of the Gods, one of the things I've been really meaning to do is write a book on my particular writing process. Well, really, it's on my outlining process, because I feel like a lot of people frequently say that they hate outlining, they really like to just sit down and write. And I've developed a process that I don't even feel like it's the most unique process in the world. I think other people do have a writing process that's similar to mine, but I made and again, the video I mentioned earlier about my writing process, it really is my outlining process. And my plan is to make a book that basically contains the content that's in the YouTube video, because a lot of people have said to me that they found that video particularly to be extremely helpful to them. And I thought, well, it's nice to be able to give back to other creatives. So if I can make a book that's useful for people to have just as a reference guide on their desk to look at and say, all right, well, I can try, if I'm having trouble with my outlining, I can try this, I can try that, I can work through these steps. If these steps don't work, these are the ways that I kind of list my ways that I approach for problem solving and working through that. But it's kind of like the idea of making outlining painless for people that really don't enjoy it, or at least less painful. In my mind, it's making outlining fun, because I think outlining can be very, very fun. I enjoy it quite a bit. In fact, I'm kind of odd in the fact that a lot of people, even though I'm a writer-artist, most of the writers that I talk to, they love dialogue, and that's their favorite part of the creative process. For me, it's not that I dislike dialogue, but it doesn't come as naturally to me as creating the overall story structure, the outline, the moving the pieces around, figuring out what's going to happen to character where, interlocking chapters and planting seeds so that when something happens in the near the climax or in the third act of a story, you can see the seeds that I planted earlier in the first or second act. I really enjoy that part. So those are my plans: a book on outlining, a sequel to Eye of the Gods, and then another top secret project that I will eventually reveal down the line. So I see more comments. I'm scrolling up to talk to everyone, but I see that Pranu Gaming is in the chat. How you doing, man? Thanks for stopping by. If I see anyone else who's new, I will definitely give you guys a shout out as I scroll through. The chat is on fire today. So let's see. Art with Osir giving some love back to Sierra Studios. That's good. I'm glad to see you guys checking each other's work out, sharing, talking, enjoying. Aaron says, and this was, I guess, in comments to working with clients. He said, "I do it that way. There will be changes, trivial ones that I might have missed that is integral to the story, which is not mine. But I demand full control of the artistic side and the storytelling." Well, I admire that. That's really cool that you stick by your guns and make it very clear what you will and won't do. I think I probably look at it more from the standpoint of people not necessarily having that flexibility, only because, in general, that's the reason why I write and draw my own stories. It's not because I don't believe in collaboration. I believe that if you have a team that's on the same page, you can create very powerful work. I myself really like to work at all the iterations by myself, and I enjoy the fact that I am kind of in control and that all of the decisions, good or bad, because I do make mistakes in my stories, are kind of my own, and that I don't really have to compromise. Compromise is a good thing and it's an important thing, but it isn't always pleasant, and I can be a bit of a stubborn ass, so it's easier for me to just do the whole thing myself. But that said, when collaborating with others, I think that's really cool that you make it very clear the stuff that you are willing to compromise on or change or evaluate, and the things that you want to be your domain and control. So props to you. Just wanted to finish off my coffee there. All right. More from the chat. I see Ordinary Lionheart in there. That's a real cool handle. Thanks for stopping by and checking out the live stream. Let's see here. Orwith Osir says you need a tablet to mount to your table so you can read the chat while drawing. You know what? I do have a tablet, and the problem I have found is that for some reason the chat doesn't stay open. It just sort of like turns on and then disappears. The other thing is that my iPad is kind of an old one, so it doesn't really hold a charge. I think next week I'm going to try that. I'm going to try having the tablet right here on the table next to me so I can just have the chat up and open while I'm working. So it's a good suggestion. The reason why I don't usually do it is because I'm afraid of spilling ink on the tablet. And also I kind of like having this side of the table free. I could probably the problem is that I have too much crap on my table. I like to have pardon me. I like to have everything to this side of the table free so I can lay my arm and rest on it. I usually have my reference over on this side, and beyond that it gets cluttered. But to your point, it's a good suggestion. I have the capacity to do it and I haven't been doing it. So I think I'm going to try it in future streams. Just try to have the chat up and going while I'm working. Actually, you know what? Screw it. We're here. We're on right now. Let me see. The other thing is I have to mute it real quick so that I don't have to, I won't get feedback. But if you guys are patient for a second, I am going to grab my my iPad and put it up here next to the table while I'm working so I can kind of see the chat. I see Chris Parrish in the chat. He says, howdy. Thanks for stopping by. While I'm grabbing the iPad, I'm going to keep going through the chat here. Art with Osir says, I have not set up my table to do that, so everything I'm doing is digital. When I work digitally, I usually will have it so I can just stream straight from my computer. And bumping I try not to bump my camera arm while I have it up there. But I mostly work traditional. I don't have anything against working digital, and I've done a few different videos on this, so you may have heard this before. But for me, because I'm in front of a computer all day for my day job, that's the reason why I really prefer to work traditional in my personal work. I don't think that traditional is better or worse. I do think it's nice to actually have original artwork, physical objects that you can sell to people, as opposed to, you can sell prints, but there's still no original when you're doing digital. That said, I personally think that every artist is different and they need to use, or that they should use, whatever is convenient or comfortable to them. For me, I'm in front of a computer all day, so when I come home, I want to just sit at a table and look at that instead of looking at a screen when I'm doing my personal work. So that's my big reason for doing traditional. Let's see here. Gonna set this so it doesn't lock. Aaron says, call it the new equilibrium. Much cooler, the way instead of the new normal. The new equilibrium. I dig that. Art with Osir says, I think Alan Moore is the process similar to the process I use for myself as I start to write more for myself. I have 14 more issues to write this year, so I can plot them out over the next 3 years. You know what? That is really the great way to do it, is writing out the whole thing beforehand, because I've found that it makes a big difference in my personal work when I'm working, having the whole story written out and actually thumbnailing the entire thing before I start. I really much prefer that as opposed to trying to write each issue as I go. In fact, speaking of Alan Moore, hang on a sec, I'm gonna have to mute this. You might hear a little bit of double talk while it's there we go. It's muted and skip ad. Okay, there we go. It's also kind of trippy that I can see myself drawing while I see the chat here. Okay, yeah, so Art with Osir says, I think the Alan Moore process is similar to the process I use to start to write for myself. I have 14 more issues. Okay, we covered that. Speaking of Alan Moore, this is what's funny. Even though I have a process that I use, that I've worked out, a method that works well for me for writing, I'm always reading other books on writing or reading other books on other people's creative process to learn and grow. I did not mention him in my in a video I just posted on my artistic influences, but Dave Gibbons, the artist of Watchmen, is a genius. His artwork is amazing, and I would say that in terms of narrative storytelling, he is a master to look at. And I happened to watch a video. I think the publishers were doing some promotion for a book that he recently did. So here's a quick book recommendation. I haven't dived deeply into it, but it's a book by Dave Gibbons and Tim Pilcher called How Comics Work. And basically what this book is it's not all Watchmen. And obviously, even though it's got Green Lantern on the cover, so it's a mix of DC. It's a mix of work he's done for a variety of publishers. But it goes into, like, there's a section here on plotting and world building. There's a section here on, it says writing for yourself, writing for other artists, because he is somebody who I think is a really great example. He's somebody who writes for himself, he draws for other writers, he writes for other artists. He does both. That's something I could see myself doing. And he puts under writing influences Frank Miller. So the whole point is that this is a book that is almost like a sketchbook of Dave Gibbons' creative process for a variety of different publishers and a variety of different work. And I didn't even know this book was coming out, but I saw a YouTube video on an interview with him and his co-author, Tim Pilcher, talking about it. If you do a search for it, you can find the interview. It'll make you want to run out and buy this. Point is I looked up on Amazon, and for some reason, they had it on sale for it was like $10, where the book is normally $24.99. So I just thought, at that price, this book is a bargain. So I just went and bought it. I was like, I know Dave Gibbons' work. It speaks for itself. I'm going to want this book. But when I ordered it, I happened to see that there was also a small book called Alan Moore's Writing for Comics. Then this book is $5.99. So I kind of thought, these two books would make a nice match set, looking at the creative process, both of the creators of Watchmen. And this one is a much smaller book. It's very slim. It's more, from what I've heard, it's an essay that he's written. Plus, he actually talks about, in the back, about ways in which his writing has changed from the time he originally did the essay. Because this book that I'm holding was published years after the essay was originally written. So he has some additional commentary. This book is a nice, thick art book. What is this? Give me, you know what? It doesn't have page numbers on it, but it's definitely, oh wait, it does have page numbers. They're just on the side, they're just, actually this is interesting. Instead of putting it at the bottom, they've got it kind of here in the middle. Interesting design choice. Not where I expected to find it, but now that I see it, it's kind of elegant. So 192 pages. Anyway, these two books I recently got. As long as we're talking about people's creative processes, I am always learning and trying to continue to learn from other comic masters and storytellers. Even though I have my own process that I'm developing, you can always learn more from other creators. Let's see. All right. Well, you know, now that I've got this right here on the side, I can actually slide the camera up a little bit so it's kind of out of my way. Because the weird thing is I use my phone as a camera, and I've been looking at the chat while working. So, you know what? I'm going to move this to the other side because it's a little distracting. For some reason, it's really weird, but looking across my drawing arm seems to, oh wait, I can't win, because now the reflection of the my lights is right in my eye. So I guess I do have to keep it on this side, because now I literally cannot see the screen at all. It's just a bright ass reflection. So, all right, more in the chat. So Aaron says, not disregarding the economic side, yes, if I could barely get clients, I would compromise no matter how painful, but it all depends on on the demand. If you have competing clients, you have control. So that is a very, very good point. And I am glad to hear that you have that kind of power and control over your work. Maybe I've been a little bit beaten down by being in the corporate toy industry and just used to doing whatever they ask. So that happens. I think that's true of anybody who works in a large corporate environment, is that sometimes you can kind of just be like, all right, whatever gets the job done. It can be a little bit disheartening sometimes because you'll spend a lot of time working on projects, and when you see that, much like with storyboarding in film or TV, you may do thousands of drawings for something, for scenes that get cut or never end up, or end up completely changed, or you do tons of iterations and only one of them goes forward. A lot of times in product design, you design many variations, and very few of the things you design, hang on, I gotta blow, I've got a little hair on the page there. Very few of the designs may actually go forward. So at a certain point, you might, in my mind, I'm just like, you know what, whatever fulfills the needs for this project. If this is what will make the retailer that's looking at this product happy, if this is what will make the marketing team or the design directors happy, I'm usually happy to. I try to be sort of I'm a little bit of a people pleaser in that sense. I just want to, I'm like, even if it's not my own personal creative vision, I've done enough of this work where I'm like, trying to enforce my own vision isn't that important. But also, the difference is I'm not drawing comics for other people. With comics, that's another reason why, again, doing self-publishing, I'm doing exactly what I want to do. And I really am hesitant to take on any freelance comics work because I really don't want to compromise. I do love comics, but they are so damn hard to make that I really don't want to do them for anyone other than me, and do them in any way other than how I see fit. So that does not mean that I will never collaborate on a comic with somebody, but as it stands right now, I really look at it as it's a deeply personal process for me. And a process that, again, in that case, that's a place where in the end, you and I think, are a lot more aligned in the fact that when I am doing comics, I really am not interested in compromising. But it's one of those things where, to a certain degree, I sacrifice some financial options in terms of making more money by doing stuff, trying to work for publishers, and instead of saying nope, I'm just gonna do my work and create the comics that I want to create. Art with Osier says, yeah, eventually I have to do some traditional art for collectors. By the way, the other thing I noticed is that now that I'm not looking at the chat, because I'm looking down to read the screen, if my voice becomes a little harder to hear when I'm turning, like right now, if my voice, I'm looking down instead of looking up at the camera talking, if that makes it harder for me to hear, let me know. And then I'll make sure that I turn my head back up and talk to you guys while I'm working. Art with Osier says, yeah, I eventually have to do some traditional art for collectors' purposes, but that is a goal when I can just do art instead of doing everything digital. There's a different feel for it versus digital. Ordinary Lionheart says, I'll have to get that book. I figured that the Dave Gibbons book and or the Alan Moore book. Art with Osier says, it's $8.75 now. Okay, now you sold me, and I'll have to get your book as well. Thanks, I appreciate that. He says, I have the Scott McCloud books, but I'm going to get that one. He says, okay, I bought those books and yours as well. Thank you, I really appreciate it. And Aaron says, how are you not monetized already? It would be great to send you super chats. You know what? I thought I had my channel set up for super chats. I will have to double check on the settings. So I definitely have it my YouTube channel set so that it's monetizing with ads. But I don't know why. I know that there was a button I had to check and to make super chats active, and I did check that, but I never followed up on it beyond that. So I will. I'm glad you reminded me because it's something I had not thought of recently. I just thought that I turned it on and then it would be set up so people could do it. And I didn't know whether you have to turn super chats on every time you start a chat. So other than setting up my account to make it eligible for super chats, which it is, I hadn't looked back into it. I think that's one of those problems sometimes when you're so focused on just getting the actual writing or drawing or whatever you're working on done, that I occasionally miss out on financial opportunities because I get a little too tunnel visioned, too narrow of a focus on just the day-to-day struggle to find time to write and draw. But yes, I will get on that monetization bus. Art with Osier says, it sounds crazy. I don't read comics anymore, but I do support other comic book creators just because. Weird since I am creating comics. I guess because I do everything online. I don't think that's weird at all. I read fewer and fewer comics, but for me, it's not because I have fallen out of love with reading comics. I love comics more than I ever have. My main problem is simply hours in the day. For the most part, and I do joke about this all the time, the fact that it takes so much time to write and draw comics it takes so much time to create art that you have less time to consume art. I watch fewer TV shows than I used to. The only content that I really do consume in mass quantities are podcasts and audiobooks because I can do that while drawing. If I weren't talking to you guys during the live stream, if I were just working on my own, I would most definitely be listening to a podcast or an audiobook while I was working. That said, when I do have time to read, usually I'm either reading nonfiction research for stories that I'm going to be writing, or I'm reading art books that are educational. Like for instance, I've got the book by Walt Stanfield called Drawn to Life, which it's another educational book, but he sort of covers, it's a collection of lessons that he gave. He was a Disney animator, And the book is a collection of the lessons that he used to teach a lot of the incoming artists in terms of drawing, visual storytelling. It's not like he goes full on into giving anatomy lessons, but he gets into all of the different aspects of visual storytelling. And that book is great. I have a pretty big stack of drawing books behind me in my bookshelf, and I just recently added to them. Um, I mean, for instance, the Dave Gibbons and Alan Moore book. I haven't even cracked those yet, and I probably won't for a while. But those are an example of the types of books that I would be reading instead of comics. Um, there is a Viz Dev artist, Marcos Matthew Mestri. He has a book called Framed Ink that is fantastic. He also has two books called Framed Perspective, Volumes 1 and Volumes 2. And I loved Framed Ink. It's great for traditional and digital artists. It's great for storyboard artists. It's great for graphic novelists and comic creators on storytelling. Now, the reason why I wanted to get his books Framed Perspective is, first off, I thought that I learned a lot from his books just in terms of visual storytelling. But I have a theory about perspective that I found for a long time. I was struggling with my anatomy in figure drawing class, and still to this day I still have problems. But the basic primitive figures that you use when you start a figure drawing, when you start building the volumes, drawing using cylinders for arms, boxes for the torso, those sort of things. That my theory was that my underlying shapes were just a little bit out of perspective, and them being a little bit out of perspective made the entire figure feel wonky. That wonkiness to me was that my primitive forms are out of perspective, so the whole figure just feels a little bit off. And I thought, well, why don't I start looking at perspective? And there's an instructor, John Messer. He teaches at the Animation Guild. And I took his environmental drawing class. I still haven't taken his regular perspective class, but I learned a ton from his environmental drawing class. He's a great instructor. He gave a lot of other great resources. But that also made me realize that I really, even though I understand the basic tenets of perspective, stuff like this, the frame perspective book really is helping me think better about environments and about drawing comics. I'm sorry, this is hard to see because of the glare from my lights. Oh, okay, now it's in darkness though. That doesn't really help. The point is that being able to use perspective not just for drawing boxes and buildings, but really looking at creating a world that characters can walk through and move through. That's something that there was a blog that on DeviantArt that Sean Gordon Murphy posted years ago that to this day I still go back and reference because it made me realize I was drawing backgrounds, like just a backdrop, instead of drawing an environment that figures could actually exist in. But yeah, in terms of reading comics, that said, I just started reading Warren Ellis's the Wildstorm. The series just finished wrapping up, but I am just starting it now. And there's a lot of other books by Warren Ellis. He's probably one of my favorite comic writers. There's a lot of his books that have come out over past years that I have not started yet. Like I've been wanting to read Trees, and I haven't started that. I have read the first volume of Injection and really enjoyed it, but the Wildstorm was interesting to me because I really came to his work through Transmetropolitan and then The Authority and Planetary. And it's interesting reading the Wildstorm because it's kind of a reimagining of a lot of that early Stormwatch and Authority work. But it's like these same characters, but really starting from scratch with a new background and new environments, like new scenarios and new character relationships. I'm really enjoying it. It's a large scale book. It's a lot to take in, but it's one of those where I'm giving myself a treat and a break. Like you said, you have Art with Those here said he hasn't been reading comics lately. I try to revolve between reading a prose book that's a story, a narrative book, a nonfiction book for research, and then reading a comic. And what I try to do is just cycle through any just continue to go through those 3 cycles until I read through whatever is new in my bookshelf, because I have tons of books that I have not even started reading yet. So I noticed that we are a little bit past an hour here. And like I said, I didn't really know how much work I would or would not get done in this time here drawing, because, and again, I love having you guys here, but I definitely draw slower when I'm talking as opposed to just sitting down and focusing on a piece of work. So, there's still a lot to flesh out in this piece. If you compare it to how much detail there is in this drawing and how much there is in my thumbnails, then I still have a ways to go to finish this one. And then once I'm done, I still have to do the second version with the backlighting. So let me wrap up here and take a quick look at the comments, see if there's anything else to address before I say goodbye to you for this this U.S. holiday weekend. Excuse me. Let's see. Art with those Sears says, same here. It's just nowhere for me to put boxes of comics like I had when I was a child. I'd rather listen to an audiobook or watch a video. I will tell you that I've been reading a lot more books digitally. Reading on Comixology or Amazon Kindle. And again, this is a real hot button question. Like, there's some people who grew up on webcomics and love reading digital and don't really want books. There's people who are just like, keep your digital crap. I only read print comics. And there's people who still, to this day, have no interest in graphic novels and only want individual issues. And that's how they like to read comics. My theory is to have books available in as many formats as possible and simply let people read how they want to read. If you want to read single issues, read single issues. If you want to read trades, read trades. If you want to read on digital, on Kindle or Comixology, have it available on all of those platforms. So that's what I try to do. It's not my place to tell people how they should read, is to make that work available in the forms they want to. That said, I prefer graphic novels. That's my preferred method. And the only reason why I publish single issues is because it takes me a few years to finish a graphic novel. And I'd rather at least get it put out a chapter or 2 each year so people who have supported my work in the past can see that I'm still working. They can see that they don't forget about me. They can see how the books and the stories are coming along, even if it's just a little bit at a time. It's not what I would prefer. I'd prefer to be able to publish a graphic novel per year. And if I was able to work that quickly, I probably wouldn't do single issues. You would just get a new graphic novel from me every year. But I can't, so you get the single issues. Art with Osier said he's familiar with the books that I'd mentioned, the framed perspective 1 and 2. Also thinking about getting the forced drawing books as well. Yes, I've taken a look at those and they are on my my radar. They look really, really good. The only thing that's stopping me is that I have too many art reference books that I have not actually utilized up till now. So what I'm trying to do is stop buying so many books and actually spend time studying from books. In fact, that's something I've considered for this channel, is to maybe take a book that I'm studying from and maybe do sort of a book club kind of thing where each week I might draw a lesson from that book or study an aspect of that book and kind of share my studies with you. Because, I show you my figure drawings that I do. I show you when I'm going to learn and study from those. But continuing my own personal education, artistic growth, to me is a big part. I'm very grateful for everyone that says things nice about the work that I'm producing now, but I still don't feel like I'm anywhere near as close to the artist that I want to be. So I am always continuing to grow and develop, and I think that maybe sharing the stuff that I'm studying and my learning process with you guys might also be helpful. Art with Osiris says, I plan one day to have the time to build my worlds in Blender 2.8 to help me with cheating perspective. I started messing with Blender myself, and once I got over learning how to navigate it on a Mac and learning how to navigate it with a stylus, there were a couple of things I had to do, but once I did that, it actually did some pretty easy, straightforward program for building 3D models. That said, I still want the ability to do perspective by hand, because I guess, I have no... There's definitely times where I've been drawing and I'm like, wow, this would be so much easier if I had a 3D model I could rotate and drop in. But for me, it's more of the level of skill I would have to develop with the CAD program in order to do that. I almost feel like I could use the same amount of time learning how to do it by hand traditionally, and then no matter what tool other people are using, I could do it. So I'm not against using CADs to support comics and illustration work. I think it's really, really good. I just don't know if I'm willing to invest the time in it. So, Arthur Sear says, I know talking and drawing is harder due to the level of focus required to do both. Obviously, I've stopped drawing so I could talk to you guys. Ordinary Lionheart says, I believe Successful Figure Drawings by Andrew Loomis is an excellent book to check out. Yes, I would say any book by Andrew Loomis is great. Successful Drawings is a good one. I've looked at it. I've looked at PDFs of it. The only physical Loomis book I have is Figure Drawing for All It's Worth. His other books, I had PDFs of them from when they were out of print. But now that they're back in print physically, I am looking to get the entire collection because they've all got them out now. Ordinary Lionheart, Art with Osiris giving Ordinary Lionheart a thumbs up. You guys are smiling, treating each other well. That's what I like to see in the chat. I really appreciate it. All right, so wrapping up again. Like I said, if you find these videos useful, if you enjoy the other videos on my channel, and you want to get bonus videos, so I'm doing at least one bonus live stream per month. And when I have time, I'll do additional Patreon exclusive bonus live streams. Those you can subscribe for as little as $2 a month at patreon.com. That's patreon.com/GERIMI. Here, let's see. You can also go to comics.jeremy.net if you would like to see the comic books that I am writing and drawing. You can check out a bunch of free PDFs I have online. And if you'd like to buy some of my books, as some of the folks in the chat have, thank you guys for supporting me. You can go to amazon.jeremy.net. That will take you to my Amazon author page. You can see that I've got a couple of my graphic novels there, an art book that I've published, an anthology that I contributed a short story to, and I'll be publishing more books there as I continue to create. So thank you for joining me. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your weekend. That's it for now.